our first set of drafts just came in for day one of MSI, and we have Astral Esports versus T1. So, quick context: Astral is a team that is from LATAM, and mainly notable player that you would probably know that's outside of LATAM would be Jose Diodo, who had time in NA, versus imagine rolling T1 as your very first. You spawn into MSI, by the way, and you roll T1 as your first team because they are the second seed of Korea, by the way. So this is a little bit unlucky from Astral, but what I wanted to point out was their preparations because it's very, very specific as to how Astral approached the draft in a way that just kind of forced the matchups in a certain way, forced the lens in a certain way, and it encouraged them to actually get some decent drafts. So I wanted to talk about how that kind of came about. So there's a little bit of a difference here where T1's kind of just like they just see Astral as another opponent almost, and they're kind of just like getting rid of picks that would prevent them from building like their impenetrable fortress comp, right? That's kind of how they've been playing, as you can see in LCK recently, and I think that's how they'd like to continue to play for the most part. And as you can see on the side of Astral, they basically ban what a lot of teams are banning against T1 because they're a little bit afraid of it. They're allergic to the Ashe, they're allergic to the Senna, and they don't want to deal with that. And a TF top is also another annoying one. They don't want to deal with these matchups and these specific chains in draft that make it really awkward for a lot of the lanes. So they get rid of it. They allow T1 to pick Kalista B1, which works well into the Draven pick. And this really enables, Astral to kind of get leverage in some of these drafts. And it's actually not bad in all respects, right? Draven, objectively, it's a favorable matchup into the Kalista against all regards, right? And it's pretty solid. Something to note here is that Rel was removed as a jungler. I believe all the jungle modifiers are now gone. So she is strictly a support pick here. This is not a flex on 3 anymore. As we get later into the draft, I believe Astrolog's kind of pick more well-rounded stuff until they save for R5, in which they go for Spice once more with the Yone into Cassante matchup. And this is kind of a theme against both games in this series where Astral actually are trying to get really creative and get advantages in draft where they can. And I actually really like this. The only problem is that T1 doesn't really care, which is a little awkward. Also noting that Nico support flex as well, but that's nothing too major. But as you can see throughout the game, they go for these like lane swap antics as well. So, the fact that the draft kind of, it went in this direction, you can kind of, T1 are leveraging gameplay to kind of navigate around it, right? It's, bot lane's a bad matchup. Let's just leave, right? Like let's just not deal with the matchup. And it's fine, I guess, right? And that's where this meta of MSI is probably going to be among the most cringe that we're going to see in a while because of these antics. Let's say it alters draft a lot unless you get away with a lot of illegal stuff in draft, right? Because let's say you can blind whatever you want and you can force whatever comp you want. You want to get a scaling AD carry. Sure, go for it. Just lane swap and then just kind of neutralize lane there and you're off to the races, right? It doesn't really matter too much. And who cares what top lane? You could pick top lane like Leona at this point. Like if it doesn't really matter what your top laner is anymore because if you're on such low economy, the top lane matchups also do not matter. So the main emphasis is more on the compositions themselves and not necessarily on this. So that's where the funny part about this draft comes in because drafted it didn't really matter that much this game. I would say, at least in terms of laning. Sure, like let's say for example, Yone Cassante is slightly Yone favorite, but if Yone has 0 gold, then it doesn't matter. He's not going to be able to scale. That's the problem here. And I like to see it as currencies where let's say Cassante is on like he works well on no currency, but like he as he gets gold, it's not like insanely efficient. I would say it's pretty decent, but like what I mean, it's not as good as Yone. But when they both have no money, Cassante kind of it usually is like the champion that is less efficient with gold is also the champion that can thrive better with less gold in general. So like another champion would be like champs like Shen or like Renekton. You don't need gold on these champions or to really be effective per se. They're just kind of effective like at certain stages based on their champion identity. And that's what kind of impacted this entire game and made it really awkward for EST. I'm sure this is not the sort of draft they wanted to play or how they wanted to vision the draft. So, game 2, they're still allergic to Ashe. So they actually B1 Ashe because they're that scared. They don't want to deal with any of these matchups, right? And it could be just because they really like to play Draven, right? So they pick Draven again. They pick Kalista again. It's technically a double counter into the Kalista, by the way. So because the Ashe breaks the Kalista's ankles and the Draven is just a favorable matchup overall. So that's totally fine. T1 clearly doesn't care, though, because of they just like to pick it anyway. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And we might see the meta shift more as we see more of these antics and like what is decided on the correct play on these lane swaps is. But again, T1 don't really care too much about the way EST are doing these shenanigans, right? Again, so EST try to pick Aatrox into the K'Sante this time. Also a decent matchup, but it's a little bit risky when you have these sort of lanes where, again, I forget if they do the lane swap here, but okay, so it's a normal matchup. But like, for example, whenever they want to opt out of it, they can. And that's the scary part about this. But regardless, the point I'm trying to make is that it's actually not too bad of a draft for Astral because they're really trying to force, get creative with how they can force advantages. They probably think they're the worst team. Like let's be real here. They're playing against a team that won Worlds 4 times. You have some of the GOATs here, and you're scared. Honestly, you're scared. But like, if you're not going to be better than them, you can try to make better decisions than them and try to cheat your way through. And that's the fun part about drafting in League, especially. So, I think no knock on this team because I think they actually drafted really creatively, and I think they're very spicy in the way they wanted to draft. And I think it actually did them some favors here, and they got some advantages. They objectively have good matchups all over the place. It's just that T1 can negate this sort of fact because they're so good at executing, and they can understand why their champions might be weaker in drafts, so on and so forth. And they play around it to such a degree. Against higher level teams, let's say like they're playing against Genji or something like that, I don't think they're gonna get away with this. But in this specific case, maybe it's their first game in, then they just want to try, see, explore a bit, test the waters and kind of feel themselves out. So no worries there. But pretty good draft from both sides, and I just thought it's interesting to establish the meta here. So.